Great rewards don't wait, so why should you? Through the Invigor Book and Buy Grower program, you could earn a $30 per bag rebate when you book all of your Invigor hybrid canola by November 14th. Talk to your retailer. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome to The Truth About Ag. Welcome to the Truth About Ag podcast, distributed under the Real Agriculture Media Network and powered by the Heber Group of Companies. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I am excited for this one. So we have on today Mr. John Heimbecker, and I am excited for the life story. I'm excited for what's happening in the industry today. And honestly, Kristjan knows way more about you. So to me, this is kind of like a blank slate. So I want to kick this off, John, first. Give me your background and I guess where you started and where you are today.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for inviting me on. I think Kristjan and I have talked about this for a little while now, so I'm glad we finally were able to connect with the time. I'm really excited. So the story is a bit unremarkable, I think. I'm actually from Ontario. I was born and bred in Toronto, and I started at Parrish Heimbecker in 1986. And in those days, we had an office right in downtown Toronto, and it's an office that had existed since, I think, the 20s. And essentially, it was originally opened as a speculation office. So imagine downtown near the train station with a big chalkboard, a ticker tape, and guys writing Chicago futures on the chalkboard up high, right? And then we would get farmers and speculators coming in off the street and taking positions on margin and doing those things. And that's the history of why the office was in Toronto. And I joined there, worked for a little bit in the office, learning futures, learning about hedging. And then I was moved to Owen Sound. So there's a series of large grain elevators that are in Ontario that were left over from Canadian wheat board days. There was a special rail rate called the Atten East rate, which was a discounted rate, which allowed the wheat board to move Western grain into Ontario, into these big elevators, like 4, 5, 6 million bushel elevators. And then that wheat would sit there, and as the river was shipping out, they would move grain by vessel from Ontario to the river and then out to Europe in those days. So once that Atten East race was canceled, those elevators became a bit sort of redundant, if you will. And one of the things we did in this Owen Sound where I went was we converted it to accept Ontario wheat. And so I went up there, learned what it was like to work in a grain terminal, which was pretty exciting. We took Ontario wheat. In those days, the crop was about 1 million tons. Now I think it's closer to 3. We would take it in, grade it, and load it on ships. And most of it in those days went to Buffalo, like to Kraft in or Nabisco in Buffalo. So that was where I spent a long part of my career in Ontario, and then came back to the Toronto office for a little bit, and then moved to Winnipeg right after the Dallas Cowboys won the Super Bowl in '93. I drove out here, and we had a long-time employee who ran the trading group who retired. And if you knew the history of our company, it's almost nobody retires. Most guys die in the chair. And the two owners at the time were very surprised that this long-term employee has actually decided to retire at 65. So he retired. We didn't have anybody that was sort of in a position to replace him. So they said, well, why don't you go out, replace him, and then in theory, hire somebody new to take over from you, and you go back to Ontario. And then I was actually the first employee to ever move between the East and West since the founder, Norman Heimbecker, went out from Ontario in the early 1900s to learn about the wheat purchasing. But after that, I sort of liked it here. I hired myself, And I guess the rest is sort of history, you know?
I like that we tied it back to the Dallas Cowboys. That's
I hope that's okay. Anyway.
Oh, yeah.
you pissed off half our viewers, but that's okay.
Well, he could have brought up the Blue Bombers and really pissed everybody off.
Well, it's true.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that he brings up sports, right? Lots of our conversations have been at Jets games, right, John? And I know you do.
That's right.
You do some work with a number of the local charities with some of the Jets players too. So let's. I'll go off on a tangent there, Evan. Why don't you walk us through? I think last time I was with you, you were just doing something with Josh Morrissey on one of the local charities. Do you remember which one that was?
Man, I don't remember, but I remember because I was out with him, and he's a cool guy.
Yeah.
Note to file. Yeah. Unfortunately, he's hurt right now, but yeah.
I know. Okay, well, let's move into some of your questions, Ev. I think the one thing I really want to ask, John, is from the outside looking in, I've always been super impressed with P&H's ability to train family members, assess family members, have them in positions all throughout the company. And obviously, I forget exactly how many years old you are, 100 and something. It's been going real right for a long time. So what advice, and the reason I bring it up is a lot of farms obviously are family businesses, whether they're in joint ventures together or it's family businesses, and they're not near as many generations as you guys. But what advice and learnings have you picked up from the company over the years that you could share with our listeners of some best practices and maybe some things to avoid?
Well, I hate to say that it might not be as sophisticated as you think it is. The practice has been traditionally, and as you heard from my sort of opening diatribe, that the family members that are interested in coming in really start at the bottom. And I think that one of the strengths of our ownership group is that the owners that are participating directly in the business know every aspect of the business, so that when they find themselves later on in management roles, they've done the jobs that they're now managing. And I think that gives us a unique perspective about what it is we're trying to do. Now things change over time, and I've been around now 39 years, so it's not the same, but I've worked in almost every division at every level. So when we've got problems, for instance, I think the quick to understand what they are because we've done those jobs, and I think it's helped. It also weeds out guys that are not prepared to start at minimum wage and work in a small elevator in the middle of nowhere for 2 years. It does take a special kind of guy or girl to do that. And we've been able to find those guys through that kind of a process. Not as sophisticated as you probably would have liked.
No, and I think I find that more interesting, to be fair, John, because, I mean, as we said, we talk to a lot of farms and we do a lot of work on that side of the business. And
sure.
And you said two things that reside with me is, one, nobody ever retires. So let's just, you might as well call a spade a spade. You're pretty close to a farm right now.
Yeah.
And on the other side, I mean, the whole people side of, we tell farms to send their kids to other farms or to go out in the industry to get skill sets that are not just the one skill set they're going to end up doing, right? So I think it's important, and I think that, especially for our viewers to hear that, is that they start at the bottom, they work through the crap jobs if they have to, and the jobs in areas that they might not like, but in the end, that gets them to be a stronger leader and gets them a skill set that actually encompasses the entire business, right?
Yes.
Well, I think 2 points too, right? F1 is that I love that they go through the company and it is simple, John, because lots of farms we deal with think it's this grand scheme of how you raise leaders. No, it's actually just kind of a simple process. They have to enjoy or at least learn about every part of the business, and you have to nail down which part they actually enjoy. Mm-hmm. And the second point I always bring up with farms is unless your child loves exactly what you do. So if they love agronomy and you're already a papered agronomist, that would be the only time they should go be an agronomist. Find out what they love, and let's get them trained in an area of business where you're maybe not as trained. Mm-hmm. And we always try to tell people that obviously some of the areas around business and marketing and even futures and options are areas where we should be talking to our kids about education if they enjoy that part versus just getting the same education mom and dad did, because we have some people that are pretty good at agronomy on most farms. So I think that, how you guys move them around each division like you said, it's simple, but it works.
So far, so good.
Yeah.
The other question I had for you, John, was just on the leadership side of, I mean, obviously as leaders go through and you have different turnover at the top of, so like, what would your philosophy be, I guess, from your perspective and your leadership style that you would have brought in different than some of the past leaders at P&H?
Well, that's also an excellent question. And without going like too far back, so I'm the last of the third generation of the Parrishes and the Heimbeckers. And actually, for the longest time and through our biggest period of growth, it was really Bill Parrish Jr., myself, and my cousin Al Heimbecker that ran the company together. Although Bill Parrish was the president, now was the vice president. We ran the company together, and we really ended up taking over because of a number of people leaving the company and through death. And up until that point, death was the arbitrator of the transition. What's so different now is that Bill Parrish has retired and Al Heimbecker has retired. And so, and the transition to me was actually, quite simple, really, because we'd worked together for so long. What will be really interesting is as I transition out, I certainly don't plan on dying at my desk. This will be sort of a unique experience for us to transition to the next generation through, I don't know, the peaceful transition of power. So I think it's yet to be seen, but it's going to be sort of a first for Parrish and Heimbecker going forward over the next few years.
Knowing you, John, I don't see that process happening in the next few years. It might start, but I can't see it finishing.
Yeah, right now there's Lloyd Heimbecker and Sam Parrish and Mark Heimbecker. We've got them deployed in various roles in the company. They're doing well. We're moving them around. I include them in a lot of the things that I'm doing. So the learning process continues, and we'll see how it goes in the future. But it's exciting for me to see it. I mean, when I started. Showed up in the Toronto office, you get a desk, a phone, and a Rolodex with no cue cards in it. And there was no training. They just expect you to get going and do something. Now we're a bit more, I don't think we're the most sophisticated at training, but, we certainly bring in the next generation with an understanding that there needs to be a collaboration so that we can continue to move the ball forward beyond the third generation, which is certainly our goal, and into the fourth and fifth.
Well, I think Kristjan, he said there too, is that he's bringing the next generation in on the meetings with him already, right? Like it's not and I think we've seen it on a lot of operations where it's just here you go, here's the keys, take it over. And the complexity, and I mean, obviously a company as large as P&H versus a family farm might be a little different on that concept, but we have also preached that farms are no longer the, couple $100,000 operations, they're multi-million-dollar operations. And I think more towards your leadership style of bringing them in on that becomes more important as these operations grow and as they get bigger, right?
I think so. I mean, remember, and you see this a lot, I guess, with first generation businesses where also the first generation leader hangs on forever. He doesn't empower the next generation to do what they need to do. He doesn't accept the way they're doing things because ultimately they're going to be different. And once our guys have sufficiently moved through the training process, we really do try to empower them, let them make decisions. Some cases they fail, and let them do it the way they want to do it. And really we're providing more almost sage wisdom because of our long-term experience in the business, and we are actually directing them to do something, buy this, sell this, that kind of thing.
I think before I go to my next question, I do have to give a shout out to Bill Parrish Jr. He probably has the sweetest Winnipeg Jets suit coat I've ever seen in my life that he wears to Jets games. It's unmissable, right? But
yeah, both Bill and Al were excellent guys. They're excellent businessmen and excellent to work with. I was very, very lucky.
So, John, the other thing I'd like you to explain is I think when most farmers think of P&H, right, they think of grain elevators, they think of flour mills, and obviously kind of in the last decade or so, they think of crop inputs. But, I think there's some other parts to your business that are pretty fascinating that a lot of people don't know. I mean, I've texted back and forth with you as you're on your way back from Asia. and even the recent investment in the port. Do you want to kind of walk us through all the facets of P&H that maybe a lot of farms don't know?
Yeah, sure. So, obviously in Western Canada, we have a presence that's reasonably well known, but we're also very big in grain handling, in Ontario. Like, people forget, the crop size in Ontario is 18 million tons when it's aggregated. So it's large, and we're the largest player in that space. So it's big there. Of course, we're less well known because, agriculture does sort of take a back seat to Ontario manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera. But we're very big in the east in grain. We've got, I think we're up to 7 port terminals now from Quebec City all the way to the 2 we have in Vancouver. As you said, we're in flour milling. We're actually building our 3rd mill in Hamilton right now, which is going to be commissioned. I'm actually going there tomorrow. It's going to be commissioned in about 2 weeks. It's state of the art. We're building another one in Red Deer, which is also very cool. It's about a year away. I'm pretty certain now we're the largest flour miller in Canada. We're heavily involved in animal feed, in farming, in layers and broilers, and we're, I'll say I could be wrong, but not by much. We're the largest egg processor in Canada. So we got quite a diverse platform, if you will, that is more or less integrated.
And I would say not many producers listening, including myself, knew about the extensiveness, I guess, of the diversification. Mm-hmm. Was this a challenge just on the growth prospect, or was this a way to harness some of the volatility that we see within the industries?
Yes, both. So obviously, and I don't need to tell you guys, the soft commodity business and farming is highly volatile. We're in that sort of period right now where prices have come off quite a bit. Inputs are high, costs are high, farm machinery is high, and it's squeezed margins. So we've always had a balance in our company between the commodity business, which we love. It's just volatile, and these other food processing and manufacturing businesses, which have a bit more of a stable gross margin or income, which helps support the overall business. We've also found that when it comes to things like food manufacturing and food, it is a bit easier to grow because we do believe in growth and we want to continue to grow a bit easier, if you will, than it is to necessarily grow in grain handling, for example.
I think, too, that one conversation we had, Evan, was that it's kind of an interesting mix. Obviously, you have flour on the carb side of the business and then eggs on the protein side, right? And it really, there's a self-hedge even in that argument, not just the commodity business versus the gross margin side of the processing. And then we could always bring in the supply management conversation on top of it, right? But there's a whole bunch of hedges that take place within that business mix.
Yeah, I should mention too, although it's a smaller piece of the business, we've been in, pea fractionation, and I've sort of enjoyed over the last 15 years watching everybody sort of jump into the pea business. Well, we've been in it for 30 years. So it's, James Cameron's coming in and seems like he's invented it, but we've been there for a very long time. And of course, we use that protein in all sorts of our further processed products because protein is the way to go these days.
Well, and it's funny because, like you said, you play the hedge, but in a lot of instances, you're watching both sides of the hedge go the same direction, which is pretty much counterintuitive of the reason why you played it, right?
Yeah, we call that a Texas hedge. That's not good.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I want to take a pause from the podcast to call out one of our largest sponsors at The Truth About Ag, Farmer Coach. We have had the largest uptake in the program since its start in 2022 and are looking to have more than 100 producers in for the fall of 2025. We've opened up an additional executive program as our legacy cohort sold out earlier than it ever has in the past, and we are asking producers to reach out for availability. We have multiple new industry supporters this year. Love the industry when they jump on board with education, and they are sending some of their most progressive and young farmers into the program. Reach out to your lenders or your suppliers and ask if they're a supporter, and if not, why not? And lastly, and the most proud we are at Farmer Coach, we are entering our 4th year cohorts, and we have an 80% retention rate with that cohort. The original one has no industry backing. They came because they believed in what we were doing. And now as they enter their 4th year, they have made changes to their operations beyond what I ever thought was possible. So if you're not looking into the program, I ask that you hurry, as seats are filling up, and we want you to figure out your definition of success, and then let us and the other participants assist you in reaching it. The only real question left to ask is one day or day one. Now back to the Truth About Ag podcast.
So I guess, John, you guys have looked at your business and created all these hedges. So if you were on the board of some of the more progressive farms in Canada, what areas would you suggest to them as they get farther through the generations and have some money to invest in these types of things? Where should farms start be looking for diversification and kind of those internal hedges? Because you're right, they're in the commodity business and they're in the real estate business, right? They own land and they produce commodities. And we always hear lots of whether you have cattle and grain, and we kind of argued that was just to be busy year round. But for farms that have to kind of start at the field and then find ways to work with companies like P&H and everybody else too, I'd be interested to get your take on where farms should be looking at those types of opportunities and hedges in your mind.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, one of the things I believe in, and P&H has stuck with this, is you got to know your knitting. And we've chosen to stay, call it in the greater ag space, because it's what we know. There's lots of opportunity, I guess, to get into fiber optics and do these things, which are run on a much different cycle. But, if I was going to not criticize farming and farmers, but, I feel like still today, although it's getting much better with the generational change, that farmers just feel a natural need to stay long all the time. And I would encourage farmers to sort of open their mind to a different way to market their product versus, I just think that the price is going to go up. And we've seen this, as we've watched, for example, canola drop from $24 a bushel to, I'm not sure where it is today, $13, $14. Guys have, we still went into the fall this year, for example, with farmers largely unsold. And it's not to criticize. I mean, in the end, a guy's got to do what they got to do. But I think, a much more, if they were to take a bit of a different view on what their crop really was and how to market it, they might find that in and of itself could be a pretty effective way to hedge the eddies and currents of commodity prices. And I know, Kristjan, you've shown me the spreadsheets that you use. They're pretty sophisticated. And that's sort of what I'm getting at. A lot of guys still, just don't do that. And I think that there's been huge opportunity in the West lost through sort of hanging on. And, the truth of the matter is, when you look at commodity prices today, you look at the world stocks, which are growing, these prices are sort of not far off probably what they should be, on average. So we've returned maybe to the mean, maybe a bit lower than the mean. And obviously there's other problems with tariffs, et cetera, that are hurting the markets in the short term. But I'd encourage, guys, and I know that there's some professional outfits out there, and, PS, a plug for your local grain company. They got a lot of, whoever you choose, they've got a lot of expertise to help guys, manage their way through lower prices.
I think I got to go back, because I got to pull up 3 things from that one. No, it's good. The first one was the investments within the industry, And I think we've seen that. I mean, Kristjan, even we've played in industries we don't know, and some have turned out, but some have not. It's that discussion of stick with what you know, and it doesn't have to be just acres and head of livestock and the farming side, but within the agriculture industry, farmers are usually a little more, let's say, competent on the investment side. So don't just diversify to diversify and jump across industries that you know nothing about. And then obviously the marketing one. I mean, we've hammered this a few times, Heaves, and I mean, we said this already. I mean, the U.S., we've been, let's say, grateful enough to be around enough farms in the U.S. to see how they do it. compared to how Canadians do it, and whether we blame the old wheat board or we blame whatever the reason is, and maybe it's just an educational reason, but I don't think John's far off here because, as we said, the growing seasons now, they're not 8, 12 months. They're 24 months. They're 36 months.
Exactly.
And whether that's on the marketing side or the procurement side, it's becoming a longer play than just sell your grain when you have to and buy your inputs when you need to, right?
I mean, even in my lifetime, early on, so sometime in the 80s, 85% of all the grain was going to co-ops, and it's completely gone. So you saw farmers make the investments upstream in elevator assets and grain trading and being involved in the grain companies, and in the end they're all gone. It didn't work out very well because I think they had different views on the way those businesses should be run, and it didn't work out. So it's a good example where you think there's something up there, there's more, and in the end, really, you needed to be spending your time buying more acres, getting an economy of scale, like a size that makes sense on your individual farm, whatever that is, and taking your business forward,
And Heaves, I wanted to pick your brain on this too, is we're starting to see the media now, obviously, with the commodity markets where they are. Guys are just close the bins, right? Lock them down. And I'm not saying that's not an answer for right now, but I'm not sure that's not a Band-Aid on let's call it a massive gash. So you tell me what's the philosophy that guys should be looking at rather than just lock the bins and hold tight?
Sell in the first 2 quarters of the year, which are already passed. Yeah, but I mean, I'll just talk through some of our strategies, Evan, right? We've been working through lots of this lately. Is that point number one is we don't just have volatility in commodity prices anymore. We have volatility in commodity inputs. And if anybody had a magic wand, what you'd have done is built a fertilizer shed 2 or 3 years ago, bought all your fertilizer for 3 years, right? And sold wheat at $12, $13 and canola at 18, which would have been a little tougher to do, but you could have used soybean options out 3 years and you'd look like an absolute genius right now. Right. And so I think in a lot of commodity production businesses, and I don't know what your guys' hedging strategy is, John, but energy in particular, and a lot of the big fertilizer suppliers, they don't do that on all of their product, but they'll have a percentage of their product, sold 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years out on those markets that they can. And then that way the volatility is not on 100% of your output. So yeah. I think that's the first point, right? Is that we always used to kind of get guys to try to look at sales up to, which kind of you had 2 years to sell your crop, the year before you seed it and the year after. And I would argue, that was a good thing to say 3 years ago. And now we probably need to even have a longer view. And it's not just the crop, it's the inputs. And then internally, I mean, I've said this before, as we've grown, probably 3 hours of every day of my life is markets and reading and research, to the point that, we're doing studies on what critical mass or how many tons do we need annually where we actually hire a full-time trader. And that, what did we say between you, me, and Jeff on our call this week, Evan? Like my further education this winter is to take X amount of hours into high-level trading courses, and not because I might do a whole bunch of it, but if we hire a trader, I also got to make sure I know where the ditches are, so they don't get me in trouble, because we've all seen enough movies on those. But I think there's a lot of strategies, even like catch and carry in the canola and wheat market, where we could pick up 50 cents, $1 a bushel with pretty low risk, that probably less than, 0.5% of Canadian producers do.
Yeah, like if you look, and I haven't looked at the futures today, but there's quite a bit of carrying charges in almost all the commodities going forward. Yeah. Honestly, I'd be selling canola for 2026. I'd be selling some wheat. I'm not going all in and pushing the chips to the center of the table. I'd be selling some, because we've got a big canola crop this year. It's going to be slow to find its way to a home. Obviously, there's a big soybean crops. There's going to be a lot of pressure on this complex. We got great subsoil moisture. It's looking like a La Nina weather, meaning lots of snow here in Western Canada and in the Midwest. So we're not going to start dry. A guy should look at those carrying charges, and whether you like the NOV or Jan 27, I think for canola, that is, I think those are pretty good opportunities to go sell 5%, go sell 7%, lock it in. It's you can make money at those prices.
Well, and I think part of it too, I had a conversation with a client this morning, or a prospect, I guess, and his was, he talked to a family member that was doing the finances and said, what's our cost? And the answer was, I don't know. And that's the starting point, right? Is that we're talking some pretty high level, let's call it hedging strategies here, which to be fair, as Kristjan said, and as you know, John, the majority of producers haven't been taught this. They haven't had education in this. In fact, there is very little education on this, even from my side. I don't know the marketing near as well as Kristjan or Jeff do, but that's the high level stuff. We're still fighting with the low level stuff of what's a break even. I mean,
fair enough.
If we'd have sold in the first 2 quarters of this year, we'd be considerably better off. And even for us, we didn't make all the sales we probably should have at that point, and that's hindsight's 2020. But I think guys just need to start with the baby steps even before we get into some of this higher level stuff of just where are we? What's our starting point? Like when do we start selling?
My 2025 wheat crop marketing is something I can always bring up if anybody in my life tries to tell me I think I'm perfect. Yeah, it's my humbling one. But yeah, I think, Evan, 2 things, right? One is, we've always said it's kind of an internal joke, right? There's only 2 types of farmers in Canada. There's those that know their break even's over $500, and there's those that are lying, right? And it's not, and I'm not saying that if your not everyone's cash costs are over 500. But even if you own your own land, if somebody would pay $100 an acre rent, it's worth something in your break even, right? You don't work for your business for free. So figure out your accrual break even and your cash break even, so that you can make decisions live. I mean, we see it specifically in the special crops, like malt barley is one I bring up. Sometimes we can make some crazy sales right at the first start of August, because someone needs to fill a train, and it's a big crop, so you can move on that, but you need to know the number. I think secondly, I honestly think one of the best things that could ever happen in production agriculture would be LED score clocks on the front of every bin that shows how much that bin went up or down and its total value every day on the futures market. Because lots of the times, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I like margin calls either, but lots of the times when guys start to get into hedging, they have a hard time seeing that number go up and down. But it's actually doing that in the bin every day, and it can go bad in the bin on top of it, right? So I think just that general knowledge of those score clocks on the bins would help kind of just make it okay that it's happening all day, every day anyway, and you can just trade it like stocks on your computer and have the same thing happen, right?
Okay, let's pull John back out of marketing and back into the story of P&H here. So I want to grab and look a little into the future, John, if that works for you. Like,
sure.
From our perspective, I mean, Kristjan and I have said it a lot on where we see agriculture going in the next decade, let's call it. I want to know where P&H, what do you see as the biggest opportunity in not just the producer sector, but the agriculture sector for your business going forward?
Yeah, I'm actually very optimistic in general for Canadian ag. I think, we have a competitive advantage. We do have the best farmers. I've traveled the world and seen the farming techniques. We've got the best farmers. We've got a very good infrastructure now. It's rationalized, as you guys know, heavily. There's been, since the wheat board ended in 13 or 14, I can't remember, the amount of investment from farmers and from grain companies in handling and processing has been massive, probably more than in the whole history up until that point. So I'm very optimistic, and I think we have a competitive advantage. So, we're obviously staying in. One of the things that P&H has been looking seriously at is sort of extending our supply chains outside of Canada. We're very integrated within Canada, but we've been looking at some opportunities outside of Canada. Hopefully some of those are going to come to fruition sooner rather than later. So to continue to grow, but the main focus is going to be here. I think, the next move for Canada really is going to be, how do we get the supply chain costs down? They've crept up over time for a number of different reasons. Some are political, but I think if we can get the supply chain costs in Canada down, we can be very, very competitive for a very, very long time in the global commodities market.
Okay, there's your softball. He hit it hard.
Yeah, so I might as well ask you, John, where do you see the biggest creep up in costs within the supply chain?
Well, there's a number of different areas. Like I've actually, I've been to Ottawa now, and with the various ministers to talk about what I call bulletproofing our supply chain, and it's getting the cost of the supply chain low enough and efficient enough that when we have disruptions in the global trade, like tariffs in China or the United States, we can easily pivot. One of the things the Liberal government's been talking about, and I'm not being critical of them here, is, well, we've got to diversify. Well, we should remind everybody that selling China was a diversification strategy, but it's not so easy to diversify to other markets, say in canola, when you've got high supply chain costs. And I think, there's a number of areas that we can improve on. I think we've got a lot of residual costs left over from the old wheat board day, the Canadian Grain Commission. You've heard that I think we still today continue to pay 50 cents a ton on every exported ton, even though we don't use, the Canadian Grain Commission, for example. So 50 cents a ton doesn't sound like much, but, in this day and age when commodity prices are where they are and input prices are where they are, 50 cents matters. I think also the railways are a problem. And when I described this to the transportation minister, like less than 2 weeks ago, I said, rates have doubled in the last 10 years and service has gotten worse. And, what's more likely, that the railways are behaving like monopolies, like we learned about in first year economics, or that all of the shippers are correct in their dissatisfaction with what's going on in rates and service. And now we do have long distances to move the grain, but we've gone from 6,000 elevators to 300. And we work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in the ports and up country. We've expanded the elevator systems to large load, large unit trains. Costs just keep going, up and up and up. And I think now might be a time where the industry needs to sit down and just have a look at what we're doing here. And I think there's been many good recommendations by both governments over time about opening up the Canada Transportation Act, having a look at the MRE, the economic rate model for domestic movement, and some of the shipper protections need to be, I think, modified to be, more useful. I also think we have continued to have some problems, with some of our ports. I mean, I sat on a roundtable committee when Justin Trudeau was first elected, and I can't remember when that was, like 2015. All we talked about was increasing exports and making ports more efficient on the roundtable that I was on, and really nothing's happened. And wherever you think, say, the Port of Vancouver is ranked, whether it's 30th or 130th, we should have the number one port in the world. We're a commodity exporting nation, right? 70% of our gross domestic product comes from exports. We should have the very best port, and we don't. And, there's two points I'd make there, which I made in Ottawa. Number one, there's no users on the port. We're one of the only ports in the world that have no legitimate user representation. And of course, if you had users on the port, you would have a port that's much more responsible to users, obviously. The second thing that we do that nobody else in the world does is the port does its own land development. So they directly compete with users for land use, and they raise money from users to support their own land development. Well, that's a misuse of financial resources in my view. And if I tell you wherever we're ranked as a port, whichever ranking you believe, we do two things that nobody else does. What would you change at a macro level? Well, I would change those two things. And by the way, all of these things are very easy to do. Doesn't require any capital from the federal or provincial governments to make changes to the Transportation Act, the Marine Act. They're very, very easy. And those are big costs that we're all absorbing through the supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this way too much, including with you, right? And the joke I always like to make for kind of the average listener is like, we figured out how to put a roof over a baseball stadium in 1960 something, but we have a hard time loading boats in the rain in Vancouver. So we have a hard time getting it there because of rail. Then we get there and you got a port that competes with its users. And then on top of that, we don't really like loading in the rain for a country that, like you said, 70-ish% of our GDP is based on export. Like, really, the opportunity is endless, and we just need to get out of our own way.
Yeah,
right? It's one of our big issues.
The federal government, I guess they privatized the railways in the early 90s, 94, something like that. And they felt at the time, and you can go back and read, there's all sorts of research and work that was done. They really felt that the profit motive of the railways and customer needs would intersect. That is to say, the railways would have this profit motive. They would service the customer. They would want to do volume. And the customer, farmer, would be the beneficiary. But it just hasn't worked out that way. They've diverged. They use that operating ratio in the public company markets, which is really about lowering costs against total revenue. So you get your revenue up rates and you get your cost down, which is cost down is service. And so here we are. And the other thing I pointed out in Ottawa is the irony is if you believe this crop is somewhere in the 80 millions, and certainly P&H's view is I think around 82 million, the railway can't move it. And they've told us that they're out of capacity. And so, and the other irony would be if China was in the market right now, I don't know that I think Australia's maybe sold them already 10 cargoes. If Canada had those 10 cargoes plus the rest, I'm not sure the railway would have been able to move it anyway. And I wonder, well, what is the quid pro quo? The railways get the monopoly. They get the ability to extract rent and do what they're going to do. What do we as shippers get in return? We're getting high rates and lousy service. I don't think that's very good.
I want to take the next few moments to call out another one of our sponsors, Maverick Ag. New look, new team, new location, and new outlook on agriculture. We've spent the last 6 months adding key people and processes to the Maverick team so we can better support the industry in what we see as complex yet exciting times. Our core consultants are the best in their fields across accounting, banking, consulting, and insurance, and we would love the opportunity to show you our horsepower. Some of our legacy products include the core financial product. Are you looking ahead, seeing financial ceilings at every turn? The markets, the cost of production, the banks. We provide a full-fledged projection package that covers your monthly cash flow worries, your bank ratios, your key performance indicators, your cost of production, and your profitability metrics. Fail to plan, plan to fail. Don't go into 2026 without a plan. Number 2, Navigator Strategy product. Do you feel like Groundhog Day is every day on the operation? Are the complexities of managing family, roles, accountabilities, people, compensation, and just the sheer number of decisions you're expected to make becoming a stressor? Are you running the business, or is the business running you? Let our experts sit down with your family and your team and come up with strategies that work. We don't consult on things we've not seen success on in our own operation or those operations that we work with. Let us steer the ship in the right direction. Along with these offerings, we also have other numerous technology, negotiating, insurance, and decision-making products available. Visit maverickag.com for more details. Now, back to the podcast.
And I think, too, one of the big things, right, Evan, is that I think as farmers, we sometimes get a little tied up in just, worrying about the weather and the price at the elevator, right? When, in fact, it was one of the reasons I wanted to have John on was I think we need to spend a little more time talking to, sure, I sell stuff to P&H, so I'm a customer, but there's a lot of areas within the industry that we're partners, right? The better the rail service is good for P&H, it's good for me, so we should both be having those negotiations and lobbying efforts against all the pieces in the supply chain. And as farmers, we need to find ways to work with the companies to have these conversations, right? Because we still carry a lot of weight as farmers when we say that they just won't move our grain, they won't work with us, right? And I think that sometimes we forget to talk at the macro level and only worry about what's going on at the local level.
Well, I think we become content, right? Like we're content saying we have no option, right? We have one customer, it's an elevator, I don't get to pick the price. It's easier not to have that responsibility side when you're correct. I mean, even when we started the EOS process internally, we said the first question was, who are your customers? And all three of us kind of said, well, we don't really dictate our customers. And that was 100% wrong. Our landlords are our customers. Our suppliers are our customers. Like everybody that works with us in relationships and networks, they're our customers. So when we start having these conversations, you're correct. We should be at the table for a lot of these discussions. But I think from a producer level, we feel better being able to say that we don't control the weather, we don't control the policy, we don't control the price we get for our grain, right?
Yeah, these are all to me at the macro level matters of public policy, and because it's public policy, I mean, we can't change the weather, but we can change public policy. We have the power. The producers are a large enough constituency to force the government to have a serious look at the public policy as it relates to the grain supply chain. Like another one that fascinates me is they want to get rid of anchorages on the West Coast. Well, the best thing we can do in Canada when you have rail service that's not very exact is you want those boats lined up so that the minute the rail arrives, you can bring the boat in. Well, because anchor chains apparently disrupt whales, but by the way, there's been actually no tangible proof of that. It's somebody's hypothesis. They want to move these anchorages away, or the lights on the ships bother the people that are living in their big homes on the Salt Spring Island, or the 3-hour shift change bell bothers them. And I'm like, if we're talking about Canada and we want to have a national strategy for making Canada more diverse and getting larger and larger in the fields that we have a competitive advantage, then sometimes we got to have a serious look at what we're doing. And these things can be done. Whether we're stuck in an El Nino weather pattern this year, that's what it's going to be. And, as farmers and grain companies will adapt. But this other stuff, it's a stroke of a pen. It's as simple as that. No capital.
I can't comment on animals after my ostrich comment on real ag got me a lot of next.
Yeah.
You're on your own.
Well, it's that fine line. And I mean, we talked about it last week with Warren Kading, right? Is that we got to get back that some decisions just honestly got to be made for the greater good, right? So there's no question when the current government, like Carney wants examples of big projects. You can have a big project like fixing the rail through Vancouver and fixing up the port. Those are big projects, but little pieces of that big project, as John said, is small legislation changes that really you just need to have a set of guts and make the right decision, right? And it might piss off some voters, but it's the right thing for the country. And I guess, John, what's your take on that? I don't believe under the last prime minister there was any thought process or discussion to do anything for the betterment of Canada when it came to agriculture. I would say currently it appears that they're at least going to have the discussion, but we should probably take some bets on whether or not there's going to be any action. That's the part we need to see.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too quick to judge what this government is going to do. Like, for instance, at the last meeting in Ottawa, it was revealed, and really supports your point, that this is the first prime minister in recent history, I don't know what that is defined as, that has actually met with the Western Canadian grain business. So that tells you pretty much all you need to know. So they do appear to be interested in doing something. But I agree. I think that large-scale projects, we need to sit down as Canadians and look at what we need. But I think that is secondary to a smooth functioning, supply chain and a supply chain that operates at an efficient cost. Then we can sit down and talk about what we need at the port or the St. Lawrence Seaway or rail, for example.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
If you got more on this topic, you keep going.
No, I mean, I completely agree. I think it's one thing that, and it was it's the one frustrating part. So the China discussion and tariffs happen. And some of the first things that are being thrown around is just a bailout for farmers, which I can argue that side. The U.S. is probably going to do it, but that's the only argument why it's a good idea. And I think you could go through every piece of the industry and think of some logical changes that would have not only a bit of benefit right now, but for the history of these farms, right, in the future and for their kids and everything. And one of them, like you said, is let's make some small changes to improve the efficiency of the supply chain. I've said, why haven't we looked at increasing our own blend rate of canola into biodiesel in Canada? The US, the EU, everybody is way ahead of us. So it would help in negotiating when it comes to trade agreements, actually, it also uses a whole bunch of our own oil. But, even the Conservative Party right now is against it, and I can't quite figure out why, because it would be an internal grown solution. There's another one. A third one, we talked about lots, was when this happened, we could have just doubled the size of the cash advance and not even worried about the interest rate, because when the tariffs came in, it's a timing problem, right? We have to see how the market flushes out and what happens to the futures and basis, and not just get in a rush to dump everything right at that time. But it just seems like we automatically go to bailouts because that's the way our government's worked with EV and auto, et cetera, versus coming up with little tweaks that the system, it would just help with the system for such a long period of time.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, your own farmer groups said in Ottawa, and I thought that this was a very interesting point of view, which was no amount of money you give us is going to make up for this. Like, there is no amount that you can give or financial aid that you can provide that's going to make a difference. We need you to solve the problem of the tariffs. And I guess it was you, Evan. Like, we have had a problem with successive governments with respect to the way they view Western Canadian ag, and we sort of take a back seat. And we have for a long time. And, the Conservatives got rid of the wheat board, and I think that was the right thing to do. And that's probably a whole other podcast. But outside of that, we've been talking about these things, well, for 39 years, as long as I've been here. And I think ag does get the short end of the stick. I mean, here we are with these Chinese EV tariffs, and it's about the U.S. and it's about our auto industry in Ontario. And those auto industry jobs are important, but they're already heavily subsidized, and the sacrificial lamb becomes Western Canadian producers. And this is not the first time that Western Canada has been compromised for, call them Eastern elites or whatever you want to call them. And it's got to be frustrating for you guys. It's very frustrating for us to see this. And, at the end of the day, the Liberals are going to do what they're going to do and negotiate, obviously, as best they can, but nothing that they give is going to help us out of what's happened.
Yeah. And to pull two positives out of that, I think historically we have gone to Ottawa with our handout and said we do want the bailouts, and to hear that the grower groups and like the thought process, I believe, is changing as we get through the generations of now. We're starting to see that the future matters more than just a bailout at this point. And the other one, I mean, we've had a couple U.S. producers on the podcast in the last few episodes, and all that the subsidies are doing down in the States is they're driving the land price. So guys take the money, they put it back into land, and it's just creating a cycle. Yeah. So, I mean, the fact that we usually end up following other countries, whether it's the EU or US in policy and how that happens, a bailout most likely will do the same thing in Canada. And we're already complaining about land prices, and you're going to hand out checks that guys put right back into land purchases.
Right.
So I'm 100% on board with both those.
Yeah. And there's been some great, Daryl Francoux at the Wheat Growers has had some really good articles of late on rail and port and some of the exact same things you've pointed out. So I think we're starting to talk at some of these higher levels, which is good. And I think, I got to give the current government some credit too. There's been some key people within government that have reached out at all levels of agriculture, right from producer, to P&H to other companies as well. And that wasn't really happening very much under the last government. So like I said, I want to believe that they're going to do some different stuff and have at least a thought process on the unintended consequences that tend to fall on Western Canadian agriculture. But so far it's a lot of talk, and we'll watch the action that takes place. And if the action takes place, well, then we have to step up and continue to work for it with them, right?
Well, listen, in all the years, I'm a self-admitted conservative, and I was asked to speak in Edmonton to the caucus on agriculture, and I had to tell them right off the bat, I just admit I'm a conservative. And I never once was asked to speak to a conservative caucus when the Conservatives were in power, going all the way back. So it does show you that they're reaching out across, and I'm sure it doesn't take much for them to find out that I am a conservative. They've reached out across those party lines and asked for a wide array of views, both conservative and presumably liberal when it comes to agriculture. So that's a good sign, a really good sign.
But I think we got to give them a chance, and then that's the thing is, I mean, you look enough at social media and you look across, is we're really good at trashing the governments that have come before us, and maybe they deserved it, maybe they didn't, but this one is at least talking the right way. And again, if they deliver, great. If they don't, we can go back to trashing. But I think we got to give them a chance at this point. And for me to say that, I'm probably as right as you are, John, maybe even further right. So I'll swallow that. But that's kind of where I'm at. So.
Well, and I think it's the internal stuff, right, Evan? None of us want to have the negotiation with the twin brothers that are fighting, right? There's no win in trying to get a good deal done with Trump and with China, right? Being Canada is kind of like having, I keep telling everybody, it's like having twin brothers that hate each other and are fighting every night, and you got to find a way to pick sides and still, do a deal with both of them. That's a tough negotiation. I don't care who you are. But some of the little stuff we've pointed out around the rails and around the supply chain, that's the stuff that has to be taking place no matter what, because there's only one country that has to look in the mirror to fix that, right? And that's ourselves. Yeah. So I think that's the one thing is, let's not forget the little things we can be working on. So, Ev, are you going to tell me to go to the 3 questions?
No, I want to pull back. I got more questions on the
good
side, and I don't want to keep John too long. So
no, I'm good. Okay.
Yeah. On the culture and side, back to the people side of P&H, and this is where I was most excited to talk to you, John, is just we have a Canadian-born company here, family, like it ties really close to primary production ag, to be fair, on that side of the discussion. So how do you keep a culture in a company that size with family? Like how has P&H kept kind of what their core values and their core beliefs were from the start, and how have those morphed and changed as leadership has moved through the company?
Yeah, another good question. I feel like, we don't, notwithstanding I'm the current CEO, we don't really focus the power at the top of it's not a U.S. model where everything is coming across my desk. We really empower the employees in our company to make decisions, and that makes, I think, the jobs a little bit more possibly entrepreneurial, which allows us to attract a certain type of person, and because they're making decisions on their own without having to, sit in endless meetings and write reports. Their ability to their skill sets surface much more quickly. And if they're interested in rising up, they're able to rise up a lot more quickly. Also, I mean, it's a big company, and really the strength of our business is whatever you would call it, the middle management or the upper middle management, which is not family members at all. Like, the company is primarily run and operated day to day by non-family members who are making the decisions on our behalf. So I think it's a healthy work environment where people have a chance to grow.
I think too, I've been lucky enough to meet some of John's key people, whether that be Justin on the input side, and he's taken over more and more stuff for you, or I unpleasantly got to spend 3 days with your head of legal and finance in Winnipeg a few years back with the Competition Bureau.
Right.
But she's great, right? So I think too that it's a pretty unique thing that it's not just the family, that I think you guys have done a great job of figuring out which personalities have that entrepreneurial spirit to rise to the top. You might call it simple, but I would say the gut feel at the top on who should move into those positions is something that's a strength within your company and how you do it.
Yeah.
Okay, Heebs, before you finish off, I got two more that tie together. So, John, I want to know the proudest moment of your career so far. And then I also want to know what one of the mistakes that if you could go back, you'd tell your younger self.
Oh, man. I don't know. With 39 years in the business, I don't know. One of the benefits of being 116, being a generational company, is that you really get to think long term. We can really approach investment and our view over the long term, so we don't get swayed by the what's happening in the moment. And so I guess I would say I'm proud in general that P&H has been able to grow and survive, largely competing against multinationals. When you look at who we are and what we've been able to achieve, I mean, Richardson's is obviously Canadian, Patterson is Canadian, but we're competing against, Bunge and Glencore and Cargill on a regular basis. And we've been able to do it. And I do believe, part of that is because we can be a bit more nimble, perhaps, in those big companies, but also we're able to attract, top talent. So as I look back over my career, I'm pretty proud. It would have been easy, I have to tell you guys, there was more than one person that approached me that told me when the wheat board was going that we would be out of business in 2 years. More than one. And I took that obviously as a personal challenge, and I thought, I don't know what you guys are talking about. And here we are 10 years later, depending on how you want to measure us, we're certainly the third largest grain handler in Canada now, among all the other things we've done. So I'm proud we've been able to compete in this environment and compete well.
I think too, I brought up the Comp Bureau case. So, for listeners, there was when P&H bought some of the Louis Dreyfus facilities, there's one in Moosomin and one in Verdun. So obviously pretty close. And the Competition Bureau took a problem with that. So I ended up magically in there as a witness. But once again, it kind of went to talking about the industry, right, Ev? Like we know that we can get to almost any grain company that buys grain in Canada within about a 2.5 hour semi-drive. And from our farm, all of the main ones are within 45 minutes, right? We got Richardson at Whitewood and Viterra at Fairlight and you guys at Moosomin, and we don't have to go that far to get to G3. We don't have to go that far to get to the crushers. And it's with that idea, right, that I could go in and have a discussion. And we know farmers in the Peace that are 2 hours away from any company, right? So I think it was kind of a unique learning experience. Kind of felt like I was in the middle of Suits. And the only reason I bring it up is I forget the lawyer's name out of Toronto, John. He was one of the smarter people I met. And I shook his hand when I left and I said, I hope I never have to meet you again. And he looks at me and he goes, kid, if a farmer from Fairlight needs my services, you've got good problems. But I'm not sure John Heimbecker would say a Competition Bureau case was that much fun.
No, well, that guy got well paid. It was an interesting process for us. The Competition Bureau has a set of rules and regulations it has to follow. And here you have a Canadian company buying out a very, very large multinational. That sort of didn't play into the diatribe as to whether or not the problems we had at Moosomin versus Verdun mattered. I scratch my head at that and think, when the big problems are big multinationals coming in and buying Canadian assets, you finally had a situation that was reversed. We didn't really get any credit for it. Now, in the end, we prevailed and we set new competition law by doing so. But it was an oddly Canadian thing when we talk about sometimes shooting ourselves in the foot or trying to look inside, before we look outside.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. That's exactly what I saw too. So
yeah.
Well, we won't keep you too much longer. I got 3 questions I always ask at the end, John, and they're not too difficult. But one is, you got a favorite book that you've read in your lifetime that you think about fairly often?
Yeah. So I guess I have 2 answers. My brother and I both liked a book by Mordecai Richler called Solomon Gursky Was Here. It's a great book. You should read it. It's a very, very roughly based on supposedly the Brofman family, but it's a mix of business intrigue and adventure and family dynamics all put into this one book. And my brother would phone me up every 3 or 4 years and say, let's read the book. And then we go away, read the book, and get together, have some beers and talk about it. So the book's always been a big, big part of my life for, 30 years at least. And my brother's since passed away, but I still read the book probably every 3 or 4 years. But I hate to say, as a child of the late 60s and 70s, Lord of the Rings is probably my favorite. I read it every 5 years. So I am a sci-fi fantasy guy. Lord of the Rings by far is my favorite.
Funny, John, he wrote the first one down. I didn't see him write the second one down.
Fair enough. Well, it's
I don't have to. My daughter has them all.
When I got sent to Owen Sound, there were some long, lonely nights. I read that book again. So that's it's served me well over the years.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, question 2. What give me 1 or 2 pieces of advice you've received over the years from mentors or good friends that that just stick. We all seem to have 1 or 2.
So Bill Parrish Jr.'s father, Bill Parrish Sr., was really my mentor. My father passed away when I was very young, and when I joined the company, I got to work very closely with him. And when I was a young trader, trading on the floor and out of the office in grain, and I used to get very frustrated and when things didn't go my way. And Bill would always say, sometimes, John, the best trade that you do is the one you didn't do. And invariably, that's turned out to be right, whether it was coincidence, you couldn't lay the trade off, or the circumstances dictated it wasn't a good idea. It almost always proved to be true when we've missed something, that it's worked out in our favor. Another opportunity's come along, or that opportunity maybe wasn't as good as we had once perceived. And that's always stuck with me, and that's one I tell my young guys all the time.
Yep, for sure. I think it comes when it comes to people too, right? Sometimes you lose a person and you just think it's the end of the world, and then magically within 90 days someone walks off the street or gets referred, or
Right.
and this new great person shows up, but you weren't even looking for somebody until that happened, right?
So true how many people just rise up to the moment,
Yeah.
and you didn't know they were really there, and then they surface to become great leaders. It's true.
100%. Okay, the last one, I used to say ag minister, but I don't think they have enough power. So now I say, if I gave you a magic wand that you could do whatever you wanted to Canadian agriculture right now, that would set it up to be the powerhouse it should be in the future, what would you do?
Well, because maybe we touched on it before. I'd like to be able to find a way, like I guess in the words of Rodney Dangerfield, is to get more respect for Canadian ag. Like, you can go to ag schools. We have good ones here in Western Canada, also in Ontario, and they're good schools. But I feel like ag just doesn't get the respect that it's due. And because of that, like, you don't hear, my son's off in Toronto working in trade finance at the bank, and you never hear young guys talking about going into ag. Yes, there's some farm boys and girls that want to do it, and obviously Western Canadians will go to ag. But we have everything. If you look at ag, like, just forget just being on the farm and continuing on your family's legacy. The processing that goes on in Canada now, we used to have no processing in Canada for our own commodities. Now, processing is massive. You can work in a factory. You can travel the world trading grain. You can be in animal husbandry, crop inputs. There's so many. It's so diverse, in my view. The opportunities are enormous, and I wish we could find a way to sort of get this beyond just what people think when you talk about ag, which is, oh, well, some guy's on a tractor, plowing his field. It's so much bigger and so much better. The investments are massive. The companies that are here doing those things are absolutely huge by any standard. And I don't know how we do it. And, part of it starts, I think, with public policy and political awareness, but also, at the high school level, and maybe not so much in Western Canada, but maybe, in Ontario, we need to do a way better job of making kids more aware of the opportunities, and in university, like, what's really available to them. Because I think the space has got huge potential, going forward.
Well, isn't it a huge opportunity right now? You look at, I always find it kind of funny that, all the jobs that AI is going to replace. And I mean, for 10 years, we've told everybody to go into coding and data and tech. And like, those are the number 1, 2, and 3 jobs that are going to get replaced by AI. Right. And it was the Secretary of Defense for the US not that long ago said the defense, group alone within the government, how many welders, plumbers, et cetera, they need. And I think there's no better time than right now to try and do that, because there's so many jobs in agriculture that I don't care what AI does, it's not replacing them.
It's very true.
Right. It's just like it is part of the trades. It very much is. And so right now is a key time to start changing that narrative. No different than the tech scene did, a decade ago when San Fran was the place to be and people were spending billions on VC startups and Uber and all that were getting started. Well, right now is the time where I think some of these hands-on careers, whether that be in agriculture or in one of the trades, could do a really good job on a marketing campaign and a knowledge kind of based approach around it.
Well, it's true, like post-secondary education could be way more focused on agri-trade. Some of the smaller colleges are doing a much better job, but certainly at the universities, it could be improved. I've always felt like we just don't get a fair shake, and I don't know if we need a magic wand or that just requires more effort from guys like us.
Yeah.
But if a magic wand was the answer, I'd certainly want to wave it over that.
Yeah.
Well, the interesting part I'm seeing, guys, and it's funny because I'm seeing it on social as the starting point, is that we've never sold ag. I mean, especially at the primary producer level. I mean, agribusiness, that's a whole other discussion of bringing people in. But at the primary production level, like we have kids at Olds and kids at Vermilion that don't see farms as a career choice. And that could be in the precision ag space, which is hilarious considering how much technology we utilize on the farms today.
Right on.
Even from the accounting and finance side, I mean, we got 2 CPAs on staff heaps. Like it's starting to get to the point where we can get those, I guess, education and careers back here. But I also see it on the social side of now farms are, whether it's the drones or guys just like playing with video cameras, I don't know. But honestly, you go through TikTok or you go through Instagram or those new, like you're seeing the pictures of harvest and like guys are actually marketing farming, which has never been done before. And I think that's going to be part of the uptake is how you sell a city kid. Show them a combine with a drone photo, and like that's the part that's going to bring them in my eyes.
Yeah.
Well, I think you and I have talked about this before, is that a lot of people make the assumption on our specific farm that we grew because Kristjan wanted more acres. And it actually had nothing to do with it. I had no plan on being the size we were. I'm addicted to business. So I love numbers. And I think if you're not growing, you're dying. I don't care if that's in an acre or value add or consulting. If you're not growing at least at the pace of inflation, you're not helping out your grandkids. But what I got addicted to was hiring people that are way better at everything than me. And I couldn't do that if I didn't have enough earnings at the end of the year to hire those people. Right. But it's that I think sometimes our rugged individualism in agriculture, it takes a little while to switch to having more pride in someone on your team being way better at something than you are than being able to do everything yourself. Right. In agriculture, that was a big thing is the farmer just did everything themselves. And a lot of those farmers are who are working for all the big companies. And it takes a while to change that, to be like, no, actually at the end of the day, if I look at how much we got done and how much better a whole bunch of the jobs were done than if I had to do them, like those are my most exciting days. And I would assume, John, you have a staff way, way bigger than we do, but those are probably some of your brightest days too, is when you hear some of the projects that your team accomplished and you knew about them, but you really just had to say yes once and then just get out of the way and great people get them done.
It's so true. And, as Canadian agriculture becomes more sophisticated, to your point on the farm, these jobs are actually cool. It's not about, you're working at the Saskatchewan or Manitoba government and you head home to do some farming in the fall and help your old man seed in the spring and he doesn't pay you. Like these are super cool jobs. You're using sophisticated equipment techniques, the financing, the futures that we talked about. And then, as Canadian agribusiness expands into processing, I mean, a canola plant today, I mean, they're $1 billion. The equipment is highly technical. You're doing some cool stuff here.
Yeah.
Well, and to be fair, before we end this, that's what brought me back to agriculture was the numbers, like the size of things. It became a multi-million-dollar business, and that's where my interest was. It wasn't on shoveling, the next grain. It wasn't in driving a combine. It was literally looking at a set of financial statements and seeing how big and how profitable and how economic growth within a primary production farm could actually go. And that's not saying consolidate. That's even the small guys. I mean, a small farm is now worth multi-million dollars.
I think one point, I know we want to end because it's dragging on, but John made one point as he was talking that I think would be interesting for farms to ponder. So the one point he said is because you're 116 years old, you get to have a very long-term view on the investments you make and the timing of them and the IRR you want, because in your mind, P&H is always going to be here way past when John's the CEO. And so your job every morning is to get up and make the right decision, yeah, for short-term cash flow, but really for the long-term success of the company. And I think for farms, that's something we need to think about. And I'll use us as an example, right? We were tight cash this fall because we expanded hard, and you're adding infrastructure. You're like, geez, maybe I shouldn't do this. And then I get talking to some friends and they're like, I'm not going to add infrastructure. I don't even think my kids are going to farm. I'm not spending anything on this. What if farms change their mindset to be, no, that like this business is always going to be here. And if my kids don't want to run it, I'll find a third party to run it. And it can really change, I believe, your mindset on how you look at building that business into the future and the strategy you take specifically on infrastructure investments that are long-term. And I think it could set farms up for some pretty cool things in the future if they just didn't feel that they had to trade every 30 years to the next generation where they get bought and sold, no different than a business does to a third party. It puts the brakes on, right?
Yeah, it's a very good point.
I think we limit ourselves, Heaves, and we've been taught that, right, over the last years of farming. It was never meant to be a P&H. It was never meant to be that multinational, multi-million-dollar company. And I think that's what's actually put the brakes on in the last couple of decades, is that it was always looked down upon. And now a company like P&H isn't looked down upon for their growth model, but in primary production ag, we are. Okay, let's end on that. So I like share, comment, subscribe. I can't remember them all because this is such a good one. And honestly, John, you are our longest podcast guest. So take that.
All right. Well, I really enjoyed myself, you guys, and good luck to you.
You betcha. And that is The Truth About Ag. Thanks for joining us. The Truth About Ag podcast is a proud member of the Heber Group, which includes Heber Grain Ventures, Maverick Ag, and Farmer Coach. We appreciate the support. Lastly, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you have questions for a future podcast, please leave in the comments below. Thanks for listening.